Okay, I am here at the Teach Better conference with Tre Gammage. He is a host of the Dash podcast, and he does social emotional learning for adults and relationships workshops. His bias as a social emotional learning is his passion. He helps educators build a social emotional competence through in person, virtual, and self paced professional development. He does this to impact students so you can support teachers. His greatest strength is helping make it easier for educators to do what they love. Educators who practice SEL report higher levels of well being, less stress, and improved student social, emotional, and academic outcomes. Trey was also a dean for 2 years until the summer. Now he's a full time consultant with Gammage Consulting Group, which he's run now for 7 years. Welcome to the podcast, Trey.
Thank you very much. That's a long time. Thank you for reading all that
Yeah.
as well. I know it can be a lot. I think the basic thing is that you hit it in there too. Is I support teachers to impact students, and that's the core and the crux of the work that I'm doing.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about your consultancy, but let's start off with a question I ask everybody, which is tell me about the time when you were in the trenches and managed a problem.
Yeah, for sure. So if I'm being honest, this is my second stint in full-time consulting. And after my first stint, I recognized that I didn't necessarily I didn't have the stories or the depth.
Yeah.
I had not been a full-time educator, and I think there was something missing. So I took a dean of students role and to learn that, to be in the trenches actually, and like, hey, what is this like on a day-to-day basis, going through it? And a part of that role, I had some conflict with some team members.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was communication style, but it was also a large task. We were going to school by a grade each year. I was leading that growth, and as we expanded the team just didn't gel how we needed to. And so we got to a place where perhaps halfway through the year, I started to get frustrated, started to get triggered. And every time I had conversations with certain members of our team, it caused me to be emotional to a point where I was emotional with some of my staff members, not in an inappropriate fashion, but, just not professional, if you will. And so from that point, it was a moment where I knew that I'm not necessarily a full-time teacher. Like, I don't see a 20-year career for me in a school, but I recognized in that moment, like, this is a moment where I could walk away. I could go back to consulting. I could say, forget this, but I need to remain in these trenches and figure this out.
Yeah.
How do I work with this administrator? How do we get these kids at the time we were working on the first graduating class? We got to get all of them through the finish line. When they graduate, I graduate. And so through the semester, a lot of adjusting, a lot of changing, a lot of adapting, I continue to practice rule that I call the platinum rule, treating people the way that they want to be treated. And so this administrator was not treating me how I wanted to be treated, and that was causing us some friction. So I took a step back, I humbled myself, and I took leadership from the folks that were hard to work with, I didn't get along with. And it worked to a point that we were able to graduate all of our students successfully. We were able to hire somebody actually in place that could help bridge some of the gaps that were missing. And before I was able to leave from the trenches, we put in protocols and practices in place for our guidance counselor to kind of pick up where we left off. And so it brought it full circle, and I found myself in the trenches, but that's exactly where I knew I would end up.
Yeah.
Because that's where we live as educators in the trenches. And so I needed that experience to really know what it was like, to be in that classroom, to be a leader in the school.
Talk to me a little bit about just the demographics, the makeup of the school. Was it a middle school, and kind of what were some problems that you were coming into as you joined that team?
Yeah, so in this instance, it was a K-12 charter.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned we were growing a grade a year. So the challenge was we've never had a 12th grade class before.
Okay.
And this year we do. So naturally, there's going to be, and I'm getting my high school experience at the same time. And we had some high school team members, but we hadn't had the experience of building this thing from scratch. And so that was probably the toughest part. From K-7 when I started, 8th grade was fresh.
Yeah.
9th grade was fresh. 10th grade was fresh. And each year there was new obstacles, whether it's our early college partner, setting up internships for our juniors and seniors, working through college scholarships and FAFSA, or even just grades. Do the kids have their right grades? Are new enrollment codes correct? A lot of are the schedules right? Credit recovery, all those little pieces where I'm much more of I'm a people person.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not that naive across the T. So that was the bigger challenge for me, is that I'm doing all these things that I'm not good at. You're asking me to do these details and organize Excel sheets for 4 years worth of students. I mean, it was only like 80, 90 kids, but
Yeah.
I mapped out their years for like their whole high school schedule. Like, oh my goodness, there's going to be mistakes in this.
Yeah.
I've got to
Yeah.
review it multiple times. And I think we just didn't have the right language or synergy to kind of do that as we needed.
Yeah, but you're taking a lot from that experience, and now you're consulting full time. So tell me about your consultancy,
Yeah.
what your goals are in working with schools and individuals, because there's so much we need to learn.
Yeah. So if I take a step back and kind of look at the macro scale,
Okay.
I'm a public speaker. Is where I got my start
Okay.
in the industry. So I worked in residence life as a residence life coach for kids, and I taught them the co-curricular development model. So we taught SEL before I knew what it was, and then in communication, I recognized the gaps that people have in communication, how ineffective most people are at speaking effectively or correctly, and that most of the issues that we have with other people, most tension does not come from a difference in ideology, but just a difference in how we're using our words and communicating. And so I recognized after I went to the World Championship for public speaking, I said, you know what? Talking for 30 minutes to kids is not going to make the change that I'm looking for. I got to work with teachers if I'm going to really impact students. If I can work with teachers for 2 hours, they're teaching kids for 8 hours, I think we have something here. Another component to some of my research and kind of finding the business was asset-based community development, which is a service learning approach that is focused on not going into a community and building something for that community, but recognizing the strengths of that community and maximizing those assets to strengthen the community. Almost a restorative process that we use in the classroom, but using assets in the community. And so I thought of asset-based professional development, asset-based personal development. And I was able to work through getting some certifications in communication and emotional intelligence and start to think about, how are we building educators' assets? How are we using the strength that you have enough pouring? I'm saying you, but we have enough being poured into us with pedagogy and this and that. We have the capacity, we have these things, but who is helping me strengthen my strengths? Not focus on my weaknesses or bridge those gaps, but help me focus on my strengths. And that's what I do. Is I find, use assessments and conduct trainings that help you focus on your strengths and recognize them. So I just did a impact report. 100% of students, 100% of educators I work with, is over 418 schools reported that they could identify their social emotional strengths and opportunities for growth. 89% are able to apply the information that we are teaching right after using it, and 93% were able to. There's another one. 93% were able to do something else. That's the statistics I forgot, but that's the work. So I'm focused on, how do you understand relationships and communication, emotional intelligence, and use that awareness to apply in your classroom as well.
So, just in my experience, I see the SELs being a lot more interwoven in the past year or so in the elementary level. But once you get to the secondary level, now in the 22-23 school year, it's kind of back to business as usual. And like every leader who keeps current on trends and what we need knows that SEL is important not only for kids but for the adults. So how do we shift the mindsets in some secondary schools, especially to ensure that they implement SEL more with adults, especially for those leaders who might be only seem to be preoccupied with the daily job of running the school?
Of course. So I've been in multiple situations, both in myself implementing and seeing other folks implement. And I think one of the first things you do is just your budget is your priority. So there's some companies, if you don't have time to implement SEL in your secondary school, can you make an investment? There's all-in-one SEL companies like Seven Mindsets that you can purchase, and they provide the curriculum and the coach and the implementation plan. So it kind of takes away some of the excuse. So say Panorama Education that has a platform to measure SEL attendance, academics, and behavior in one platform, and will still provide you with a professional learning experience for you to implement that. So there's options there. But if I look back, SEL is a systematic approach. If I look at CASEL, who obviously we follow the guidelines, adult SEL is step 3. After we built the team, after we selected the curriculum, after we announced the program, now we'll train our adults. That's the backwards part. I think for the focus is how do we move step 3 to step 0. And when you're onboarded, do we have an onboarding process that's effective for you? Do you have your logins correct? Do you have the email that you're supposed to do? Is somebody checking in with you? Like these are SEL practices that are outside of the framework. This is the culture and the foundations of the school that we built. So the truth is we're practicing SEL every day. Are you doing it with intention? And so there's 3 steps that I say is first, is SEL a part of your PLC meetings? And what I mean by that, like checking in with adults, one simple reflection question to start a weekly PLC meeting can be how you include SEL and include awareness and relationship skills in there. Another step would be like more focused, like quarterly SEL PD, just for your educators, whether it's a section that's 10 minutes or a whole 2-hour PD section. That's what we can do. And then like for me personally, I look at 2 sides. One is in-service training. So you're ready to do the work. Here's a 2 to 4 hour training we can implement to help build the skill. I think it's relevant for a one-time session. If you're just going to do this one time and pour it on now and build the skill, here's a one-time session, but we can also do quarterly. But on the other end, I want to help folks do the implementation process. And there is a shift when you get to secondary where it's not as focused on SEL skill building, but SEL should start to translate into college and career experiences. And so in 9th and 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, what was self-awareness and self-management should start to turn into job shadowing, job studies, field studies, and applying that information, mock interviews, college fairs. These are the opportunities to practice the skills we've been learning in the K through 8. And so if we look at it from in high school and secondary, if we consider SEL as a career and technology education tool rather than a political framework that we have to implement, I think that we can see a difference. And on the adult side, simply add it into your SEL meetings, establish a committee, because this is not something that we should do. There's champions at your school that want to practice SEL. Empower one of your educators to organize a committee. And meet with that committee. Maybe it takes you 3-6 months to actually put something on paper, but establish a committee that meets monthly. Let the committee put together some ideas on how we can integrate SEL into our PLC meetings or, to practice that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it takes just, I would say, finding the people who are interested in having that as part of the school culture, and starting small, but definitely I think a lot of those tools that you mentioned, I mean, whether or not you want to bring in a trainer from some of those companies that you mentioned, but also how can we support, especially when we're onboarding? I mean, one of the blog posts I just wrote for the Teach Better team is how to not just the onboarding, but also welcome new staff who are being, hired whenever during the year because there's still open positions or people leave or whatnot or long-term subs. And I think that's also like that adult SEL piece because somebody's new to the building. It's not the time when all these other people started that were new. And how can we not let those people feel like left out or ignored?
There was an article I just read too from Ed Week. Last name, I think it was Denise Superville. Was talking about keeping your students motivated all year long. And she's hit on some of those things that you said as well, and also mentioned like it's a lot of it is about being intentional, being thoughtful. You know what I'm saying? Like, am I so busy that I can't draft an email to welcome somebody? And then that person feels awful. I was in the training with the teacher the other day. This is their first year. They're ready to quit already. As a parapro because they don't feel like they're getting the support that they need from folks. And so at the beginning of the year, in this article, Superville, she sent her staff a survey that just asked random questions like your favorite this, favorite that, whatever. So that way she had like a Rolodex of information that throughout the year, before a break, after a break, teacher celebration time, and see morale is low. She's just able to pull from that list and acknowledge one teacher or all the teachers based on a survey she took one time at the beginning of the year. So when we think about adult SEL implementation, it doesn't have to be grandiose and super time consuming. Like send out a survey, receive the results, and then plan days that you're going to celebrate your teachers. You're done. you know what I'm saying, you have a PD day, those are usually mapped out ahead. Ask somebody to spend 30 minutes on their self-care
Yeah.
practice or,
Yeah.
or a teacher SEL practice. What gets prioritized gets done. So if you want it
Yeah.
to be a
Yeah.
priority, it's gonna happen.
So I wanted to ask you about your podcast, the Dash podcast. It's
Yeah.
also on the Teach Better Podcast Network. So how long have you had this podcast? What is kind of your main topic that you talk about? And do you tend to interview people, or is it a lot
Yeah.
just you talking?
So the podcast started officially in 2017. When I
Okay.
officially established my business like as an LLC. And I started as a way to add value consistently for free.
Okay.
And it started off with conversations that I've had with people, and it went through a frame. Passion, what's your passion? How did your passion lead to your purpose? And what is your process for making that dream a reality? We did 72 episodes there and then transitioned into education. I got a business coach, kind of restructured to make sure it was operating like a second business first, and now it's directly in line with the rest of my business. And so from episode 72, now we're at 226. I think we
Okay.
just published today or posted today. And now the episodes are focused on contacting, celebrating, interviewing school leaders who are solving problems for school communities.
Okay.
So most of the time that's from an SEL lens or an adult SEL lens, but other times it's just celebrating people. So I will often have educators come on who have written a book or who are doing something innovative or just have another perspective to offer in that landscape. And so I primarily do interviews. Recently, though, I've been doing some solo episodes where I will review articles that folks are reading and then just add my adult SEL context to it. So I may read an article about 10 tips for SEL implementation, and I'll add commentary about how you include adults in that implementation process as well. So it's really cool, and I think, I'm just now getting to the place where I want to do more promoting and advertising and all that kind of stuff. But a big thing for me is documenting history. I heard of somebody say document, don't create.
Yeah.
So at this point, 225 episodes, 9 days worth of content, over 50,000 views in 50 countries. And the most important thing for me is that when my son has kids and they ask what their grandfather did, he's got a Rolodex of 225 episodes to listen to
Yeah.
and consider. And so like that's something like I take that so seriously, getting to document my history and for somebody to be able to share that. And so as many people have heard it, this is an artifact from my family history and legacy. And so that's the most valuable part for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've not really thought about that, but it that way. There's things that they can view in 50
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Right?
And kind of tied together, my father was a lawyer for 20 years. And he was a defense attorney, so he's worked on some gruesome cases, but also some nationally popular cases. And he was preparing to renovate his basement and was going to throw away all his case files. I'm like, wait, Dad. Like, I might not ever look at these either, but how cool would it be to just say, my father, who's now the third black judge in a 200-year county history, here's 10 of his most popular cases. I mean, that is something that I think we consider too often, but as we kind of grow and the world changes, some of these things are like, these are original artifacts. Paper copies aren't even going to be here anymore. Let's keep some of this stuff and pass it down, through a legacy.
Yeah, that's important to remember. Well, we talked a lot about how schools can implement more SEL and your work as a dean, and bringing some of your ideas to the school and finding that you needed a little bit more experience in a school as well to kind of reignite your business this past year. Out of everything we talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Intention is everything. And there's actually it's kind of boring, but it's a good audio book by Wayne Dwyer.
Okay.
Called The Power of Intention. And I just think that so often you have everything you need. That's why I focus on asset based, because you truly have the skills. My job is to help you recognize you have them. And the biggest difference I see is intention. You do stuff on purpose. When you practice SEL on purpose, when you just simply write it down on your agenda, you're making a bigger impact. And that builds momentum, and that momentum snowballs into greater things. So you're already practicing SEO. Just do it on purpose. That's my takeaway.
Yeah. So important to remember. Where can people find you online and find your podcast, and what social media do you use?
For sure. So you can find me online at seoeducators.com and SEO Educators on YouTube. And then all my social media tags are at Tre Gammage, one word. Nice and simple.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast.
Thank you
And,
very much.
I'm glad to have met you here at the Teach Better Conference.
Likewise. Great questions.
Hey.
Very fun.
Yeah. So if I